Hello and welcome to Innovation Culture Coding Live. It's another day and another case we're deconstructing today. And this show is all about giving a window to independent coaches and consultants and making them shine. So that's what it is all about. And I really want you to have an understanding of how the people are behind the companies. So it's really about the person and how the person would be working in a scenario. And that's why we are deconstructing different cases in that live environment. My name is Jens Heitland. I'm the founder of this show and I'm your host. I have been working in very large corporates in my history of work and have built up a business over the last years, which is all around innovation and how we can work and how we can connect people in different ways. And this show is one of the many shows I'm hosting, which is featuring independent coaches and consultants. But before we go into introducing my guest of today, little hint towards the show web page. Go to heitlandinnovation.com/innovation culture coding and you will find everything from the guest of today's show. You will find video clips later on. You find the audio version of it. You will find the show notes, the case we have discussed, and of course the other guests who have been on this show. And it's from very cool entrepreneurs who are working in as a chef and supporting companies to our guest today working with operation and helping companies in operational spaces to Hollywood movie directors, like everything in between you will find in this show. Go to the website heitlandinnovation.com/innovation culture coding and you have the possibility to search and find interesting people, authentic and really raw live shows where you understand of what person is behind of that company and you can engage with them in different ways. So today's topic is around scaling for the spotlight. Why entrepreneurs need to focus on operations. So it's all about how can you as an entrepreneur, as an owner of a business, use different methodologies and different ways of thinking while scaling your business, focusing on operation. We go deeply into that today. But before we do this, a little shout out to our sponsors of the show. The sponsor of the show is the College of Extraordinary Experience. The College of Extraordinary Experience is an amazing college which teaches and brings people out of the experience economy together. And I have been there a couple of times. I've been teaching things. I've been coaching parts of the college, and it's incredible what they're doing. So it's literally an experience in itself, just being there, but it's kind of a conference style environment, which is not a conference style. So it's completely different. Have a look on the webpage as well, and you will find out more about them. Little shout out and last one before we go really into it to our partners. The YouTuber Kit is teaching entrepreneurs and people who are interested to understand how to work with YouTube. We have Shivi. Shivi is the video production company behind all of my shows. So they're really producing all the different shows, all the different videos working with me. Then we have Urban Innovation, which is the network for urban innovators and people working in the urban environment. And then 360 Digital Transformation, which is the partner that's focusing on digital transformations in the German market. So now that we have all the official stuff done, let's get our guest in. Hello, Alicia. Welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Jens. And I must say, I am very impressed by the intro of your show. That was a high quality production.
Yes. Yeah, it's an awesome team. I can't do that myself. But that's what it is all about. As an entrepreneur, you don't need to do everything yourself. You just need to have awesome people and awesome partners around you.
That's right.
So, Alicia, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing? And how do you earn money? How do you work with your clients? And a little bit of glimpse of what you're doing.
Okay, so let me see how I can give you enough information without boring everyone to tears. So I own a company called Equilibria, and it is a 16-year-old operations management firm. And we specialize in creating business infrastructure. The way we earn money is through a combination of things, Jens. There's a book that we have, there's consulting services, coaching services. We are also working on a new online course that's scheduled to go live sometime in the beginning of 2022. So in a very short form, that's who I am and that's what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will put later on, or I let the team support me in putting as well a couple of links to the book directly so people can find it straight away inside the webpage.
Great.
Let's get the banner as well away that we can focus on you.
All right.
So we have looked into taking a case that shows and enables you to show what you're doing. So the case of today's show is a nonprofit organization seems to grow overnight due to the appearance of the executive director, which is the founder, in a TV show, which is a daily TV show in the US. And they are growing incredibly. It's like people are running and want to work with them, want to buy their topics. So the board is seeing that the founder of the organization is not really able to cope with that, struggling a little bit. And the founder is called Emily, like my daughter, and we have joked about that before. So the founder recognized that as herself as well, and Emily thinks like, hey, I will do something different. I will try to stand in and say, I will look into how to do that. And what does Emily? She hires Alicia and tries to figure it out together with her. So that's the starting point.
Yes, and thank you, Jens, for bringing this up. So as you mentioned, this Emily is a character, one of a few characters that are in my book.
Yeah.
And she owns, as you've already mentioned, she started this nonprofit organization. And a lot of people may not realize this, but when nonprofit organizations get to a certain point, they have to have a board. And those boards actually have the power and the authority to oust you. Even though you may have started this organization, they ultimately have control and they can decide to get rid of you. So Emily catches wind of the fact that the board is threatening a coup. They're threatening to replace her. And so she actually doesn't hire me in the book. She hires another consultant. And if you want, we can talk through what they start looking at. But she's basically trying to save her position, not only as the founder of this nonprofit organization, but also as the executive director. And what she's learned, or what she's come to realize, is that the skill set that was necessary to actually start this nonprofit and grow it to a certain point are not necessarily the skills that she'll need to actually take it to that next level.
Yeah, that's often the case. I've seen that as well with other people on the show. It's like, if you're, and myself as well, if you're in an executive position and you have grown a business to a certain point, you need to change. So what you have done until that time might not be the right equipment anymore to go to the next level.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what Michael Gerber talks about in his book, The E-Myth. You have to shift from working in your business to working on your business. But what does that actually look like? How do you actually do that? And that's what we explore in this book.
Yeah. So let's get, how do you start the journey in, okay, she needs help, she needs to figure it out. What are the first steps? How do you get her, in this example, into, okay, we get it turned around?
Yes. Great starting point. Great question. It all starts with building that solid foundation. And that foundation that we're talking about, Jens, is business infrastructure. So what exactly is that? Business infrastructure is simply a system for how you link your people, your processes, and your tools and your technologies so that everything comes together in a cohesive way, so to help support your company as it continues to scale. And now you can scale in a sustainable manner, a profitable manner, and in a repeatable manner, because you want to be able to replicate that success over and over. That's what scale looks like. I know you have a lot of experience working with IKEA, so you know what a large company looks like. You know what scale looks like. So it all starts with asking the question, what work needs to be done.
Hmm.
And what that means, Jens, is this consultant kind of gets Emily in a room, a conference room, and they're there for a full day, for at least 8 hours. And they are literally brainstorming every single activity that's performed in that nonprofit organization, no matter how mundane, no matter how complex. And when I say everything, I mean everything. So anything that's operational, marketing and sales related, business development related, things that are related to HR, the technology piece, legal compliance and risk management related things, facilities management. It's literally an accounting and finance related activities. What are all of those different things that are being done? It's literally an exercise to get everything out of your head and onto paper.
Yeah.
And not only do you, in the process of going through a brainstorming exercise like that, not only are you identifying everything that you currently do, but it's also a good opportunity to have conversations about things that you recognize you may not be doing, but need to do in your company. And we're talking about just Emily herself, but ideally, if you have team members, it's always a great idea to get them involved in this brainstorming exercise as well. So that's the first step, is laying that foundation. And laying that foundation means answering a very fundamental question. What work needs to be done?
Yeah, I love that. And I guess, I mean, it's not just half an hour. It really requires putting everything on the table
Yes.
and understanding it in all depth. And I mean, I've worked with a lot of companies, and it's not an easy task.
No,
It's
it's
not
not.
everything is obvious. Yeah, that is a task that needs to be done. It's like everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I encourage having someone who can help facilitate that brainstorming session,
Yeah.
someone who isn't as close to everything as you and your team members are, someone who has a neutral position.
Yeah.
So if you decide to hire an outside consultant, even a business coach of some sort, or just someone else that you trust and respect who can come in and, again, just help guide and facilitate that exercise without any judgment and without any preconceived notions. And I don't know if you want to start talking about what happens after that point.
Yeah,
I'll
let's
just
get into
follow
it.
your
So
lead.
it's really putting everything on the table, putting everything on paper, like you said.
Yes.
What is the next step?
And it might be worth pointing out also, Jens, that I recommend those very large sticky notes or post-it notes, the
Yeah.
kind that are almost the size of a poster board. So I call it, by the time you finish with this exercise, you should have new wallpaper on your wall. your
Yeah.
wall will be covered with all of these different activities that you're doing. And every single time I've ever worked with anyone and their team as they go through this exercise, they are literally in awe of just how much
Yeah.
they're doing.
Yeah.
So once we go through that exercise and you now have these walls in the room covered with all of these different tasks that are being performed, the very next step, the very next thing that Emily and the consultant she was working with, his name is Tim, Tim actually showed up at their very next consultation. And I don't know if you can see this here,
Yeah.
but just imagine where I have A3, B3, and C1. These all represent, this is just a small sample of some of the activities that were identified during that initial brainstorming session. So imagine you take every single activity that's on those large post-it or sticky notes, and you then transfer them to these little note cards or index cards.
Yeah.
Now, I should point out, I'm a fan of using index cards instead of small post-it notes, because post-it notes are very flimsy, and because of that adhesive backing that they have, it can quickly lose its effectiveness. But when you have an index card, it's a lot sturdier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yes, you'll have all of these activities on these individual index cards. And imagine being in a room, Jens, and you have these index cards spread all across the table. And there could easily be 300 plus index cards. You may not think you're doing that much, but I guarantee you are.
Yeah, and
And
I
so,
think that's if we get to the case again, just for
mhm,
those who are starting to listen us now. So it's a non-profit organization that's scaling incredibly fast, um, and the founder of the organization would like to get grip on it. So working with you and understanding is mapping every activity that's happening, um, first on paper, getting it done, and then putting them on index cards. So
correct.
for everyone watching this live, you're now back on track because we're getting people joining all the time.
Oh, great, great.
We need to
Okay.
loop back sometimes. So
Okay, sure.
you have like literally a huge table with a lot of index cards. What's happening next?
So what happens next, and I should probably, for those who are just joining also, maybe add this as additional context. The reason they're going through this exercise is because they're starting to build a foundation
Yeah.
upon which they can continue scaling and growing this nonprofit organization sustainably. So the very next thing that Emily and her consultant Tim do. So again, imagine you have all of these different tasks, A1, B1, and there's about 300 plus usually across the table.
Hmm.
Tim then actually suggests to Emily that she start to group activities that are similar in nature into
Yeah.
columns
Yeah.
along the table. And he suggests that she choose not more than 9 columns. And the reason is because studies show there's this famous psychological study that was done, I think it was back in the 60s or 70s, by a Harvard psychologist. And it's called the magic number 7. And it's this idea, Jens, that the average person can easily recall 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information at a time.
Yeah.
So if I were to ask you just to start rattling off the names of fruit, right? And I time you, let's say, in about 20 seconds, you would likely come up somewhere between 5 and 9 different pieces of fruit.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you want to start to group activities that are similar in nature into no more than 9 columns. And the
Yeah.
reason is because once you go through that exercise, so let's imagine here you have activity A1,
Hmm.
A2, if everyone can see that. And let's say you also say, well, A3, all of these go together. So then once Emily grouped all of these activities into very distinct columns along the table, Tim then placed a blank index card above each column, and he asked Emily, if you had to associate all of the activities in this particular column to a department, what would the name of that department be? And so in our case here, just to keep things simple, we're saying, okay, well, task A1, A3, and A2, we would call that Department A.
Yeah.
Or in real life, you may say this would represent accounting. This would represent marketing. This would represent sales, management, HR, so forth and so on. So they go through that exercise through every single column that's on that table. They then look at each column again individually. So now you know the name of the department, you know all of the associated activities that fall under that department. The next step is to identify who ideally should be performing, and you're laughing at my analog, my very low tech.
That's great. I love it.
Very low tech, but it's so effective, Jens. I promise it's very, very effective because it's so visual.
Yeah.
So you have these little stick figures here, and they have a laminate surface, and you just start to place the stick figure above the activities that role should ideally perform. Now here's the catch, and this was where Emily was getting into trouble before with her nonprofit. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do a particular thing. Let me repeat that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So as the CEO, as the executive director, as the top person in charge, as the founder of your organization, do you really need to be getting involved with answering the phone all the time? Do you really need to get involved with making copies or printouts of reports to prepare for certain meetings. No, it's not the best use of your time. So as those of you who are listening to this right now and who are watching this, I want you to challenge yourself to think, in a perfect world, if you had access to all of the resources that you needed, who ideally should perform certain activities within each department that you identify for your company? And the output of these exercises that we've just described, Jens, is that you have far more descriptive, detailed, and transparent job descriptions. You also now have a basis for your company's organizational chart. How many small businesses can't even tell you what their company looks like on the inside?
Yeah.
So that's the purpose of going through those exercises, that painstaking exercise of figuring out all of the activities that have to be performed. You group those activities, similar activities, into departments, and then with each department, you identify who is the ideal resource to perform these different types of activities. Now, here's where a lot of small businesses can also get stuck. They start to immediately think, oh my gosh, I've identified 5 additional people that I don't have and that I can't afford. Calm down, because I think we naturally start to think of everyone as a full-time employee. There's so many freelancers out there. There are so many. We're in a gig economy. There's so many people now who are accustomed to working in a gig-like fashion. You can still get this work done. You can still delegate things on an as-needed basis. So don't get stuck into the habit of thinking, oh my goodness, I have to hire all of these full-time people. How on earth am I going to afford it? I can't offer them benefits. I can't pay the payroll taxes. And you can work yourself into a frenzy trying to convince yourself why it can't work. Well, I want you to challenge yourself to think outside of that proverbial box and think about freelancers. You can offer internships. You can offer volunteer type opportunities, especially with Emily, talking about a nonprofit organization. Nonprofits are accustomed to working with volunteers. There's so many creative ways that you can get people, those resources that you've identified, onto your team doing certain types of work.
Yeah. And I guess without knowing, if you do this as a team, so let's say the executive team or whoever is in that small company, they're all doing this exercise together.
Yes.
If they're putting themselves or saying, hey, maybe you're doing this right now, but maybe the other person is better in doing that, or because of the group of the different tasks, you should be taking that because you have 80% of it. I guess it's also just because of like having the conversation about these topics will be more efficient just automatically without changing anything, because you agree, yeah, you should do that as well because it's way easier. You just take it once and you do it and it's done, instead of 5 people doing the same thing.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jens, because that's really the power in doing these exercises, is you're getting involvement. People are much more likely to accept change if they are a part of that change. But just imagine if Emily tried to do this exercise without the involvement of anybody else. It would be a disaster.
Yeah.
It would be as though she's playing the role of a dictator and she's saying, this is what you should do. But if you involve everyone or as many people as possible, and to your point, they can start to talk amongst themselves and say, well, you know what, I'm doing A2 right now, but 1, I don't enjoy it, or I may not be good at it, or I just may not have the time to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Is that something that someone else can do? Or is it something that we can delegate to a new person that we add to our team?
Yeah. And then to the gig economy, I think it's also one thing I learned, or at least I took for myself. I gave myself a fiction hourly rate, where I said, okay,
Yes.
I take this hourly rate for myself. Would I really pay someone else that much amount to do that task? And then you think like, yeah, maybe I wouldn't. And then you think like, okay, how can I find someone who can does that for way lower price,
That's
and
right.
maybe even way better because they're professional only doing that. If you
That's
take
exactly right.
if you take bookkeeping in my case, yes, I've learned it some years back and I've literally no idea anymore. I still could do it, but super inefficient. And like, I have a company which is way better in doing that, and they just do it, and it's way cheaper for me.
And
Just
you just
simple.
may not enjoy it. I can tell you
Yeah.
honestly, I don't like it at all. I hate bookkeeping.
Yeah. Ask me.
But I think, I'm glad we're having this conversation because it brings up another really good point that I'd like to share with everyone. And that is when you start delegating work, I think it's always a good habit. And I'd love to get your insights on this too, Jens. I think it's always a good idea to at least try to do something yourself first before you delegate it to someone else, because then you kind of know all the pain points. You know where there's probably room for improvement. There's opportunities to potentially streamline the way something is done, but you won't really have an appreciation for that unless you at least try to do it yourself once before you hand it off to someone else.
Yeah. 100% agree. I do this in cycles. So every couple of months, I pick something and do it myself. So, for example, if we take the podcast as an example, I'm cutting videos myself just to do it.
Mm.
And I have learned to do it in the beginning when I started. I didn't delegate everything to externals, but but I know how hard it is, how much time consuming it is. Same with social media and marketing.
Yes.
I in between take a week and it's like, now I do everything, and it's like, holy crap, is that a lot of? But like you said, you get into it and you exactly know, and then you fine tune as well in between, and then you delegate way more efficient than if you wouldn't understand what it is about.
That's exactly right. We're
Yeah.
on the same page. Yes.
So we have now mapped out the building foundation. So we have mapped out the foundation, all the tasks. They have grouped into columns, 9 columns. Um, and then this is a base for understanding, okay, who could be taking which responsibilities and which tasks, and maybe even columns as a totality inside of the business. Um, that then leads into possible job description, into like organizational charts and
Yes.
description about the company even. What else is part of the fundamental part of an organization, or getting that understanding?
Sure. And the additional things I'm about to describe now are located in other chapters of the book. But what happens next is, now that you have that foundation, you know the activities, you know the departments, and you know the people, you can now start to identify all of the processes that have to be documented within each of those departments. So again, you have your department, Department A. You have certain activities that have been assigned to Department A. So what I would then do, what I recommend people would do, for those of you listening and watching right now, look at all of those activities that you've assigned to a certain department. And then I want you to group some of those activities together even more within that same department. So you may say, for example, you may look at activities A2 and A3. And let's just say if this was your accounting department, and task A2 really said deposit check to bank account. And task A3 may say send invoice to customer. You may group those two activities together under the accounting department and say, if I had to group these two activities together and assign it to an accounting process, the name of that process would be called my accounts receivable process. So it eliminates, or it kind of gives you a head start on your process documentation in 2 ways. One, it's helping you to identify the processes that you need to document throughout your company, organized and categorized by department. And then the second thing is that because you've already identified so many activities, it's really giving you a jump start on the actual documentation piece. So task A2 and task A3 may actually become steps in your actual process once you start to document it. Now, a quick note about process documentation. Don't get stuck into the habit of thinking everything has to be in a traditional standard operating procedure format. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do that. Again, I'm gonna go back to IKEA again, because IKEA does this so brilliantly through pictures. When you purchase a product at IKEA that requires assembly, there's very few words. It's mostly pictures. And regardless of where you are in the world, when you buy an IKEA product, you can follow along with those pictures. That's a process. That is an operations manual for that particular product. So whatever you need to do to communicate to other people, this is how you do X at my company. So whether that's in the form of a video, whether it's through pictures like what IKEA does, whether it's through a standard operating procedure, or even a process flow chart, whatever is the best way to communicate to other people, this is how you perform this particular process. That's what you have to do. Okay? And then,
just adding to that, it feels like you have mentored me over the last years. But we didn't know each other at that time. So it's quite funny because a lot of people in larger organizations, you know this, that process mapping helps you to understand this. When I started my own business, I was doing literally that. And I still do it in between because things are changing, things are moving. I'm having different ideas. So I have a process flow chart on a lot of things, even on the details of the podcast level, where I just want to have that structure. Maybe that's a German thing.
Yes.
to get that structure, but I as well know, and my output is 20 times higher if I exactly have that mapped out, because I take, I could just do this and this and this together. So I just do it once. And that sounds super, super silly. I get that.
No,
that,
not at all.
Maybe not for you, but others.
No, it is the only way you can scale.
Yeah.
You have to document it. It has to get out of your head. And again, what we're saying, put it on paper, but it could be a video. It could be a number of things. It could be something else that you found on YouTube that someone else has already brilliantly captured. And you might just say, let's link to this video. This particular person has done a great job of describing how to do this particular function. Yeah. Whatever it is, the point is you have to start to delegate. And the best way to delegate is to have things documented, right? Now, there are a few more things that activity, again, once you know your departments, the activities, and the people within that department, within each of those departments. We talked about your organizational chart. We've talked about identifying and eventually documenting your processes, but it also helps you figure out what's the best way to lay out your physical workspace. Yeah. Even if you are just in one room, in wherever you live, that's okay, because you can create different zones within your workspace. You might say, okay, in this corner, I'm going to have everything that's sales and marketing related. In another corner of the room, I'm going to have everything that's technology related. And in another room, in another space, you might say, this is where I'm going to have everything that's accounting or finance related. But the point is, now that you know those departments, you literally use that to structure and organize every single aspect of your business. I know a lot of people use productivity management tools like Asana and Trello and Monday.com. My team, we use Notion. Use your departments as that high level way of starting to organize things that you have in Asana. Start off with all of your departments, and then within each department, you have very specific projects. And you can color code things. I know in Trello, you can definitely color code things. Yeah. ClickUp is another one. So again, it's so empowering knowing that information. Now that you know what the structure of your company looks like, you can also come up with your records management systems. So within each department, you're looking at each person and you might say, okay, well, in our HR department, there's only one person. The HR director is the only person who would ever have access to all of the documentation or the records, whether it's physical, digital, or a combination of the two. So that's the other thing, that part of that business infrastructure, building that foundation that we're talking about, that's another part of it as well, or is the records management piece. So by the time it's all said and done, Jens, when you've gone through this framework for business infrastructure, there's 7 key elements. And the story of Emily Miller and her nonprofit covers the very first element. And then the other chapters of the book each describe the remaining elements and gives very detailed steps for how you can create that business infrastructure.
Yeah, love that. Can you just give the 7 key elements?
Sure.
A rundown?
Absolutely. So the very first one, and now keep in mind, I'm going to be using the terms that we use in my company, but I'll also put it in more layman's terms. So the first one is called what we call the business parts analysis. So that's going through that exercise that we talked about earlier, identifying all of the activities, grouping them into departments, and then assigning different resources to those different activities within each department. That's the business parts analysis, and the output are your job descriptions. Yeah. The second element is called the business design blueprint. That's a fancy way of saying your company's organizational chart. Yeah. And that's literally taking all of those departments you've identified and all of the people you've identified and just placing them in whatever structure you think is best for your company. If it's a true pyramid, if it's flatter and leaner, you can now illustrate that through your organizational chart. The third element is physical records management. So that's literally figuring out how to best organize all of the physical records that you might have for your company. And the way you organize it is by department. The fourth element is electronic records management. So imagine all of these electronic files, and this is probably the case for most people listening and watching right now. You probably have the majority of your information stored digitally. Yeah. What is the best way for you to organize that data? I propose organizing it by department, and then within each department, who has full access rights versus view-only rights, who can edit, who can comment. Those are the kinds of things that going through that exercise is going to help you figure out. The fifth one is called Workspace Logistics. So again, it's literally how do you organize your physical workspace. Again, I'm going to suggest you go back to organizing it into different zones, especially if you are a solopreneur or if you're just working from home right now, like so many of us are because of the pandemic. And then the sixth element is called the service delivery blueprint. That is literally where you look at your core service or product offering and you literally document every single step from the moment a customer places an order until the moment you actually deliver that order. What are all of those steps? How is it broken up into stages? What are all of the tools and technologies that are needed to perform in order to make sure that you take your customer all the way from the moment that customer places an order until that order is actually delivered to the customer? What are the technologies that you're using? What are the steps? Where are the bottlenecks? Is there technology that you can use to further automate and streamline that order to delivery process? And then lastly, the big one, the biggest daddy of them all is the business process manual. And that's literally where you are looking at every single department. You've identified all of the processes that need to be captured within each department, and then you actually document it and have it stored somewhere where others can access that information. So those are the 7 elements of creating business infrastructure. That was a mouthful.
Yeah, huge. But I mean, I have been working in different business over the plus 25 years now. I see so many businesses who are sometimes doing fractions of this, but not everything. And I
Yes.
think especially smaller businesses, like which smaller business has the process mapping? I
None
don't
that
know
I've
too
seen.
many.
Yeah, I was
I
going to
don't know.
say none.
That's why I say I have. But maybe that's just the weirdo behind the microphone here.
No, you're absolutely right. And I don't want to pick on because I'm a small business owner. So I don't want to we shouldn't give ourselves too hard a time, because surprisingly, I also do work for larger companies as well, and they don't always have their processes documented either.
I can tell you.
Yes, and they are so siloed, it's not even funny. The left hand literally does not know what the right hand is doing.
Yeah. So I agree. It's the same value for a large organization. It just is more painful because
Yes.
imagine you have let's say 5,000 employees and you haven't done it, then you will have fun to figuring it out.
Right. It will be very painful. So
But
that's a reason to get it done now,
yes,
while it's still somewhat manageable.
yeah, and it's still worth it to do it for a large organization because you will understand the efficiency gaps, like we discussed, like people handing over things to other people, which is not really necessary. Maybe you have a completely wrong department structure, whatever it is. It's I see that in the same value. It's just that, yeah, it might take a little longer time.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up also, because the larger companies, because this can absolutely be applied to larger organizations as well. I just recommend doing it on a department
Yeah,
basis.
you
So
start small. Yeah,
exactly, everything we just described over the past several minutes, just apply that on a department per department basis,
yeah,
instead of looking at, because some of these companies are just so incredibly large. It would just be a Herculean task to try to look at it in its totality. But rather, if you can look at it into individual, segments or divisions, departments of the company, that might be easier and definitely more digestible.
yeah. And then in my experience, having done similar things when I was working inside the business, it's not just an efficiency gain; it's also team building. People talking about the different tasks,
Yes,
exploring, hey, I didn't know that you're doing this.
that
Like
is so
really going
true.
into that, or even, let's say, going into the infight of, hey, but I want to do this. No, I want to do this. Like, let's agree of who is doing it. So we figure it out. Or I take this, but you take that, and everyone is happy.
Yes. And, we're talking about adults here. And you would think there would be, I have yet, honestly, to see any arguing take place. It's more of a, what you said, the first part of what you said, it's more of a, oh, Jens,
Yeah.
I didn't realize you were doing that. Well, I'm doing that too. Or I didn't realize you did it in that way. That happens a lot, where
Yeah. True.
the founders of a company, they're in a room and they're thinking a certain person is doing something a certain way, and then it's not until they're in the same room at the same time having that conversation that they realize, oh, I didn't realize you were doing it that way, or I didn't even realize you were doing that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, it gives people the opportunity to share with everyone else exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, so that they can come together as a team collectively and figure out a better way of doing it.
Yeah. Great. So, for those who join later, how was the book again called?
It is called Behind the Facade. You can't miss it. It has a green
Yeah.
cover with a lion on the front of it. It's called Behind the Facade, and the subtitle is How to Structure Company Operations for Sustainable Success. So on the front cover is this lion. He has a spotlight. He's on a stage. He has the spotlight shining on him. All eyes are on him. It's all about him. He's done a great job of marketing and promoting himself. He's front and center stage. But if you turn over the book and you look on the back side, there you see a tiny little cub. So that's why I call the book Behind the Facade. And facade is not a bad thing. We have to put ourselves out there as businesses. Obscurity can be detrimental to any company, regardless of size. It doesn't matter how great your products and services are if people don't know about you. So you have to get out there and do the personal branding as well as the company branding. Yeah. You have to have that visibility. What I'm arguing for is that once you have erected this facade and you are attracting customers and clients to your business, just make sure that your company operates on the inside as good as it looks on the outside. So you've created this beautiful exterior for your company, this customer-facing exterior, but just make sure that those back office operations is able to handle the demand that is sure to come as you continue to do such a great job of marketing and promoting your company.
Yeah. Yeah, so true and so important. Let's get into the last part of the show where I'm always asking my guests, hey, what would be your dream customer? So if your dream customer would watch this show, how would you explain to them, hey, you might be the right person, you might be the right company?
If you are listening or watching this right now and you have more business than you can handle, let's talk. Because it's a great problem to have, but if it goes on for too long a period of time, it can be catastrophic. Because bad news always travels faster than good news. All it takes is for one customer to have a complaint and to go onto social media and to put it out there into the universe for it to bring your company down. So if you are just spinning your wheels, your employee turnover is very high, your customers are starting to complain, you may have even failed an audit of your company of some sort, let's have a conversation, because you just need some processes and a business infrastructure in place so that you can continue to scale, but in a sustainable, profitable, and repeatable way.
Great. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. This has been great. I love the fact that we could talk about a particular character from the book and this dilemma that she's in. Every character, by the way, has that fast growth issue. For her, she happened to appear on, her being Emily Miller. Emily was on this popular daytime television show. And then all of a sudden, all this traffic came to the website. And now she has a different type of problem. She went from not having enough customers to having too many. So it can definitely happen. I always like to say, Jens, we're all one viral moment away from disaster. We all want those. We all want those viral moments, but do we have the operational structure? Do we have the business infrastructure to handle and sustain it? Yeah. That's what you have to ask yourself.
Love it. Alicia, well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I really enjoyed it. And it feels like we have been working together for years.
I know. We are kindred spirits, and I really hope we can continue having conversations offline, Jens. And I'd love to have you come on to my show.
Happy to do that. Happy to do.
Great.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And for everyone who is watching this, please go to the webpage where you will find all the links, and as well links for the books later on, the different clips we're creating, the audio version, and of course this recording when we're done with the live show. Go to heitlandinnovation.com/innovation culture coding, and you can reach out to Alicia, of course, and she's happy to engage with you. If you have questions, you can shoot them into the chat wherever you see this video, or later on in the audio version. We will try to answer them. So if I find questions and Alicia is not aware of that question, I will bring the questions to her and we try to answer them. So please take questions and we're happy to get them forward. Super. Alicia, thank you very much. And for everyone watching, see you next time in the next live show.